Welcome everybody back to Boost Motion, guys, and today I want to talk about the different dynagraphs for the VR30 platform. But also, you can, guys who have the VQ motor or anybody who's watching, I'm gonna break down dynagraphs and give you some kind of terminologies and everything and verbiage so you guys can just understand more about what you see and reading. Because you know, everybody wants to learn. But before I get into the video, guys, please add me at Boost Motion IG, Boost Motion at Facebook, and Boost Motion at gmail.com. Otherwise than that, guys, let's get into the video. Alright guys, so there's gonna be different verbiage I'm gonna talk about in this video. Okay, so let's break it down. When I say wheel horsepower, we're talking about how much the car makes to the ground, not how much the car makes to the crank. Crank is usually when the engine is bolting up to the transmission, okay? That's usually when you see a Hellcat that says 707 horsepower. That is from when the engine makes that amount of power before it even hooks up to the transmission, okay? Cool. Now, another few things I'm gonna talk about is peak wheel horsepower. Talking about dynagraphs, that's the little swiggy lines you have seen going up. There's going to be a certain rev range, let's say between 1 and 7,000, that the car may peak out and make a specific amount of wheel horsepower. So I just want to break that down into the video, so let's get into it. Alright guys, so let's jump right into it. This is a red alpha tune from AMS, right? They did this on a stock RS. From what I believe, they didn't have no other bolt-ons. And I know that the wheel horsepower is really low in here, so I think it's a completely stock red sport with just a tune. Now, the numbers to the left are wheel horsepower. Remember, wheel horsepower is how much the car makes to the ground, not to the crank, okay? Because of 15 to 20% drivetrain loss. Now, moving forward, the numbers at the bottom is going to be the RPM range, all the way up to red line, okay? Now, let's move forward. We're only going to pay attention to the red lines here. Number one, the top red line is the amount of torque this car makes. If you notice that this car makes a lot of 4 pounds of torque on the tune, coming from right around 2,700 RPM and holding right around 450 all the way about to 4,500 RPM. That is regular daily driving amount of torque. So this is why this car feels so torquey and so fun as a daily driver, because we're getting so much torque on our low to mid range, and this is how our cars get to take off so quick from stoplights and at the drag strip. Now, if you guys want to look at the wheel horsepower, we peak right around 45 to 4,900 RPM, right? Now, if you notice that the car starts tapering off power right around from 5,000 all the way to 6,500 to 7,000 RPM. Some guys are going to ask why. Reason being is the amount of cooling, repeat, the amount of cooling on this car, even when you do upgrade your heated exchanger, it's still not efficient enough because our turbos are still so small that we have to run at a higher boost that we just literally heat soak the car so fast. Remember guys, the more PSI, the higher PSI you run your turbos, the hotter the charge air temp, the hotter the amount of hot air that comes out the turbos. And you guys know that hot air is bad for the engine because you have pre-ignition and other issues. Alright guys, so if you guys are going to go to Mexico, this is another part you need to pay attention to. Some of you guys like doing road racing, and you notice that the car makes good power, but you guys look at this dynagraph, and what do you guys see here? You see that, shout out to AMS Performance because they do a good job at this, but other tuners outside of AMS Performance I've seen have a hard time doing this. You see how the peak is right around 420, and then it tapers off to 400? That means you're losing on average 20 to 25 wheel horsepower road racing. And that's before you start heat soaking through the gears. I'm just saying, I'm just putting that out there. So that's why people say our cars die out upstairs, because our cars just are not efficient. We can run more PSI, but that just makes the charger even hotter, which means you make pre-ignition at a high RPM a ticking time bomb. We don't need that, period. There are ways of alleviating this, such as E85, but we'll get into that next. But I just wanted to show you guys what people talk about, how we lose top end. I'm telling you, I've seen sometimes you may see some tunes with bolt-ons go up to 450 wheel horsepower. But you look at the closer to the 6,500 RPM, the car will taper off to 380. That's 70 wheel horsepower loss. That is a big difference of keeping up with modified M4s and literally getting gapped by buses by them. Literally. So otherwise, let's jump into the next part. Alright guys, so you guys already know what I circled. It's pretty much the peak wheel horsepower on the 85. Some of you guys still ask, well, what is the 85 and should you run E85 mixes? Just to briefly say it, E85 mixes or E85 is just a better fuel to use. It's less prone to pre-detonation on the combustion cycle or compression cycle of the cylinder head. Okay, so the air and fuel mixture usually pre-ignites before the spark and it goes boom. But when you do this with E85, you have a less likely chance of it happening because the amount of temperature to ignite E85 is a lot higher, pretty much. So yeah, that's why E85 is just better fuel to use. But anyways, you guys can see that this car is making right around 500 wheel horsepower, and it holds it all the way up to about 6,000 RPM. Of course, they start tapering it off because, well, there's one or two reasons. Reason being is they probably advanced the timing a little bit too much and they had to pull back because of hotter charge attempts. Or two, even though torque does drop a lot, maybe they just want to make gear changes a lot less harsh on the traditional torque converter style transmission. Look at that torque line. Look how that torque line goes all the way up to 550. Remember, the 93 tune was right around 400 to 450 pounds of torque. So this is just a completely different animal, guys. You will definitely feel a difference, and the times will show it. But also, just look all around how this car will compete. Road racing and just dig racing. This car will be a beast. It is probably a beast. Traction is going to be an issue. You guys will probably want to know, with this amount of wheel horsepower, what kind of cars will it be able to compete with in dig racing and road racing? Well, you'll be able to compete with some 93 tuned full bolt-on M4s. This is other 3-liter twin turbo cars. You should also be able to compete with GTRs, stock Nismo GTRs, because they dyno right around high 400s, low 500s to the wheel, right, depending on the car, you know, whatever the case might be. There's plenty of other stock cars out there too, like Hellcats are right around 500 to 550. But you know, who loves Mopars? Do we? Maybe we do. But there's a lot of other cars on the market that dyno right around 500 to 550 horsepower. So this will put you in supercar territory on how much power it puts down to the ground. I'm not saying any McLarens or anything like that, but you're definitely going to be right around that territory. And that is some of the difference. So let me just get into this part. I know this is not apples to apples comparison, but most 93 tune cars are going to be right around 220 to maybe 240, maybe 250 wheel horsepower, but majority between 220 and 240. Now, just using this one as a quick example, see how the peak is right around 420 in the black map and the peak is right around 500. That is 80 wheel horsepower difference. That is a big, huge, monstrous difference, because people always ask, oh, what's the difference between 85 and 93 tunes? They guys, most of the cases, most people are not going to be dyno tuning 460, 470 or 93. Most people are going to be right around 420 to 440. That 50 to 60 wheel horsepower is a huge difference. But let's move to something else even more important. Look at the dip. Closer at the, remember, we're between, in road racing, you're going to be between 4,500 to 6,500 RPM. The black map starts to dip right around 400 to even maybe some other people's maps and tunes, 380. But with a E85 tune, you'll taper right around 460 to maybe 440. That is still a huge difference when it comes to performance, guys. That is a whole different animal, a whole different car, and I just wanted to display those huge differences when it comes to 85 and 93 tunes. So, my final thoughts. Alright guys, so I really hope you enjoyed that video. I hope I answered all the questions that you wanted and needed when it comes to dyno graphs. But otherwise than that, guys, you can contact me at Boost Motion on IG and Facebook, and also boostmotion@gmail.com. You guys have a good morning, good afternoon, good night. Thank you guys. You have a good day.